The outside view of the United Kingdom in March 2026 is often one of watching a country perform a very slow, very expensive experiment in how to make a simple process as difficult as humanly possible. On Wednesday, March 18th, the European Union officially adopted the One Substance, One Assessment data sharing platform, or OSOA, and in doing so, they essentially built a high-speed rail network for chemical safety data. The OSOA system is a masterclass in common sense. It creates a single mandatory EU database for all chemical safety information, managed by the European Chemicals Agency, or ECHA. Instead of companies having to submit the same data to 5 different agencies for 5 different laws, covering everything from toys to pesticides, they now upload it once, and everyone who needs to see it has access. And I find it incredibly revealing that while the rest of the continent is moving toward the streamlined and coordinated future, the UK has flatly refused to join the platform. And just for once, they were invited. Instead, the British government has opted to keep its own isolated UK REACH database, a move that is effectively a declaration of independence from efficiency itself. And this decision means that British chemical and life science firms must now pay for 2 separate registrations for every single product they want to sell in both markets. We talked about this 2 weeks ago, but now in the EU it's live. And I find it almost impressive that the government can talk about cutting red tape while simultaneously handing its own industries a roll of double-sided industrial strength tape and telling them to get to work. And industrial leaders warned last week that this double data tax isn't just a nuisance, it's a genuine threat to the viability of the UK's foundational industries. And we already talked about danger for industries yesterday. The Chemical Industries Association has even hinted that chemical output in the UK has fallen by a staggering 60% since 2021. What happened in 2021? Does anybody remember? Well, it has fallen by a staggering 60%, and this new data wall is only going to accelerate that decline. And my view is that the UK is currently building a digital moat around its economy, but instead of keeping invaders out, it's just making it too expensive for the locals to do business with the world. And I find it almost comical that the government's justification for this is regulatory autonomy, as if having your own private filing cabinet for toxins were a vital component of national pride. The cost of this autonomy is estimated to be around £2 billion. Money that British companies have to spend just to resubmit information that the EU already has. And I find it staggering that smaller firms are already warning they will have to withdraw products from the UK market altogether because the cost of the UK-only paperwork is higher than the profit they make from selling the product. And we aren't just talking about industrial solvents here. We're talking about the ingredients for medicines, the components for green energy technology, and the advanced materials for the UK's industrial accelerator is supposed to be promoting. And I find it almost comical that the government is trying to launch a life sciences vision while making it twice as hard for a life sciences company to register a new substance in London as it is in Lyon. The OSOA platform is designed to be fair, and in this case that means findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, which are 4 words that the UK REACH system currently seems to be at war with. By refusing to join, the UK isn't just opting out of a database, it's opting out of the early warning system for emerging chemical risks that the EU is building into the OSOA framework. And I find it incredibly telling that the EU is using OSOA to identify substances of concern faster and more accurately, while the UK is still trying to figure out how to staff its own agency to do the same work manually. And the view from Brussels is one of bewildered pragmatism. They offered a seat at the table for data sharing, but the UK preferred to sit in the hallway and take its own notes. And I find it quite satirical that the government calls this Global Britain, when in reality it looks like local Britain. I don't want to say Little Britain because I love Little Britain. But in local Britain, you have to pay a premium just to have the same safety standards as your neighbors. The double data tax is a direct hit on the competitiveness of the UK's manufacturing base, a sector that is already reeling from energy costs and trade friction. And I find it almost impressive that the Treasury can ignore a £2 billion bill for the private sector while simultaneously claiming they are pro-business. The reality of 2026 is that if you aren't part of a large data sharing bloc, you are invisible to the global supply chain. And being invisible is a very bad strategy for a country that wants to be a science superpower. I find it staggering that the UK is essentially asking its companies to do the same homework twice for two different teachers and then wondering why the students are dropping out of the class. The one substance, one assessment finalization is the moment the EU closed the door on the old fragmented ways of doing things, and the UK has decided to stay on the wrong side of that door. And I find it satirical that the government's REACH reform is currently moving at the speed of a tired snail, with deadlines being pushed back to 2027 and 2030 because they realize they can't actually build a replica of the EU system from scratch. And the outside view remains that the UK is a country that is allergic to alignment, even when alignment is the only thing that will save its industries from a slow motion collapse. And I find it incredibly revealing that the one substance rule is based on the idea that a chemical doesn't change its properties when it crosses the English Channel, a scientific fact that the British political class still seems to find debatable. Well, the double data tax will lead to a hollowing out of the UK market, as companies prioritize the 500 million person market of the EU over the 67 million person market of the UK. And I find it almost poetic that the taking back control crowd has ended up with control over empty shelves, as more and more specialized chemical products simply stop being available in Great Britain. And the OSOA system also includes a union-wide human biomonitoring study, a project that will help protect public health by tracking chemical exposure in the population. And I find it satirical that the UK is opting out of this as well, as if the British people had a different kind of biology that didn't need to be monitored in the same way as everyone else in Europe. And the outside view is that the UK is currently a regulatory island in a world that is becoming more integrated and more data-driven kinda every single day. And I find it really staggering that the reset with Brussels hasn't touched this issue yet. Likely because the government is too scared of the alignment headlines that would follow a decision to just use the EU's data. But thanks for joining me for this look at the great chemical data divide of 2026. It is a story of one substance, two assessments, and a government that is finding out that autonomy is just another word for paying twice for the same thing. So keep an eye on the Chemical Industries Association briefing, because that is when we will see if the government is going to offer any data subsidies to stop the smaller firms from fleeing the market. And I'll see you in the next video as we continue to track the outside view of a kingdom that is finding out that in the world of 2026, the only thing more dangerous than a toxic chemical is a toxic trade policy. So stay sharp and remember, in the world of 2026, the only thing one substance actually gets you in the UK is two separate piles of paperwork and a very large bill from your lawyer.